Welcome, everybody. We are going to be starting our Droplet Form Builder Introduction course. This will give you a good introduction of our form builder tool. We're going to be covering a lot of information, so this is a recorded session, and I hope that you will be able to reference this as you are building your forms, or be able to reference some of the documentation that I'll throw into the chat as well. So today we will be covering creating a new form. We're going to be building a very simple form just so I can cover all of the different areas of the builder. We'll go over the layout, the workflow, if we need to add notifications, and then some of the other features that we have in here that can aren't necessary for a complete form, but maybe necessary for your organization and your needs. My name is Shanna. I'm the Customer Education Manager here at Droplet. We also have Nick joining us today. Nick is our, oh man, I always forget your title.
It's a subject matter expert.
Subject matter expert. He was once somebody building forms on Droplet and has moved over to our team and will hopefully be a good resource for you all in building out forms. And he will be available in the chat if you have any questions. We'll also have some time. I'll save some time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. And I'm happy to stay after the meeting. We have other opportunities for questions as well if you need. Okay, let's get started. I'm gonna throw in a couple links here just at the beginning. These are some of our resources that you may need as you are building out your forms. And we are committed to helping you throughout this process. So all of these resources are available to you, and super willing to help you out. Let's get started. There are a couple different ways to start a new form. You can start a form from scratch, which just means that you're adding everything in, or you can start a form from a PDF. So if you have a PDF version of your form, this is a good option to, similar to like if you put a PDF into a Google Doc, it populates new fields and it tries its best to format it. Sometimes it doesn't do what we would hope it would, but it does add a bunch of those fields for you. Today I will be just starting from scratch. I think that's a great way for us to understand the platform a little bit better. But I do have previous videos where we have started from a PDF on our YouTube channel. So if you access the link when I send this out to you, you should be able to see previous examples as well. Okay, so once you have logged into Droplet, you may see a home page similar to this. Maybe it says you have no assignments because you haven't had any forms completed yet. What we want to do here is navigate to this forms page. And if any of you are not seeing a forms page with options like import or this plus form, create form button, we may need to update your permissions so that you have access to Builder or to this forms page in general. All of the access to users is given through this organization tab, and we have created roles in here. So this form builder role will need to be added to your account if you are unable to see those. And if you aren't seeing those, please put your name and organization into the chat. I want to make sure that you are given the correct permissions for your organization and have access to all the things that we'll be talking about here. Okay. So the first thing we'll want to do, navigate to the forms page within Droplet, and we hit this plus form button here. This is where we put the title of the form that we're working on, a description. It is not required. If you've been with us before, that used to be required. It is no longer required. And then a few more options here. So right now I'm going to be adding in an application form. That's a great way for demonstrating a lot of different field types and a little bit of a workflow. Droplet community, schools, application, and I'm going to put the date because I do use this example in other trainings, and I need to differentiate this. This name needs to be different from any other names of forms. Description, I'm going to leave that blank. Sequence ID is not necessary for most forms. If you have questions about that, feel free to come to open office hours. And then we have a few options here. This is where you would generate from a PDF or an image. So if I toggle this on and I click create form, it'll prompt me to select a file to generate this layout from. This toggling this on and this on are ways to provide a level of security through authentication when accessing your form. All forms will be given a specific URL to be able to access. And if you want to restrict that to only users who are in your organization, you can click this sign in required to view form. And if you want people to further authenticate before they submit, you can click this always submit the form as a signed in account. As this will be a public facing form, as it's an application, I do not want those toggled on. So I will keep them off and I'm going to create the form here. It will open up the builder in a new tab. And let's get acquainted with what this looks like. Top left, we have the name that we just gave our form. If we ever edit that, it will change up here. Then we have this draft with an arrow down, drop down. We use versioning in our forms to protect data and to protect our submissions, so we're not introducing bugs when we make changes. So we create versions. If I were to like say, hey, that's everything that I wanted, and I publish, we would see a published here and no drafts. And I'll show you that probably towards the end. And if we ever need to make any changes, we can click this plus new draft button here, and that will be how we are able to make edits to our forms. Right here, we have some navigation to other areas of the visual builder. Our form, which we often refer to as our layout. So this will be all of the fields that are used in your form. And then the workflow, this is what's happening in the background, where it is moving when it's submitted, where it is moving when it's rejected. And if there are conditions of like where it should move, those are defined here in this workflow. Then we have a little status here of saved. If I were to make a quick change here and drag a field over, you'll see that that publish button is gone and we have this save button here. We do not have an auto save feature. Currently, there is a lot of validation that goes into place when we are saving. So I'm not sure what engineering's plan is on the autosave feature, but as of right now, when we save, we're also checking for any errors. So we'll want to keep saving as we're going through this process so that we are not losing any of our progress as we're building. This little toggle here is to take you to the code editor. Droplet uses React and JavaScript languages. So if you are familiar with that and comfortable, you can work inside of the code editor and you have access to other areas, which I'll show you later as well. By switching the tabs here. And to head back to the visual builder, I just toggle that off. Then we have like a little 3-dot menu here. I can debug, export, upload, test workflow, and then transitions, which is a feature that is fairly new to the visual builder. And it is restricted to certain plan types. So if you have the plus plan, this is available to you. And I'll show you how to work that. And then we have our little profile icon. You can see that I'm logged in and I can go to my account or log out if needed. On the left-hand side, we have access to all of the components available to us, components or field types. We call them components here at Droplet. And then on the bottom, we can move this up or down. This is our navigation menu. So this will show you where we are at in the form. In the middle here, we have our canvas. This will show you what the form is looking like. To an extent, you are able to change what it looks like for each workflow step. So that view can change from the canvas view. And on the far right, we have our properties panel. These properties will change depending on the field or component type that you have in here. So a simple input single line will have these properties available to you. And we'll go through some of those examples. And something really important to note here is you saw that the submitter name and email was already populated on this from scratch form. These are the two fields required for any Droplet form. It will create an object with a name and email of whoever completed this submission. And that is important in the way that Droplet processes submissions. It always grabs the, the name and email of who submitted the form to be able to track your own submissions and to see who was the one that was completing those. And an action button that it shows submit here, but you also have the option of reject in further workflow steps as well. Okay, that's a simple overview of what is happening here on our page right now. Let's get into building out our form. I'm going to build a really simple application. So while I do need these two fields, I need them with the ID down here, submitted by name, and this one submitted by email. These IDs are how Droplet associates data with certain fields. You can have, I could call this submitter name. You can have the same label for all of your fields, but you'll need a different ID for every single one. And that's why they are differentiated by the ID. But instead of submitter, I just want to call this applicant. That was the email. And then I want this to be the applicant name. I also really like to add a header just with like our community schools logo and then the title of this form. So I'm going to come down here. We have our interactive components, and then spaced out here, we have some visual components. And on the bottom, we have our more complex components. So right now, I want to grab in an image. Within the properties panel is where I'm able to make the changes that I want to for this image. For the source, I have downloaded a little logo here. So I can click this little cloud button. It's going to prompt me to either select or drag and drop. I'm going to use this logo that I've downloaded already, drag it in there. That's a really big logo. I don't want it that big. Here we can adjust the width of it. And it's tiny when it's right there. So I'm going to change the size of this to something that I like a little bit better. And you can always adjust these settings as you're going along. You might see like, that's not quite right. I actually wanted it on the right side. We can change things up as you're moving along. I also want to put in, I dragged over a formatted text. Sometimes we just need to put information out there like the title of our form. So Droplet, community schools, application. I think I want it all on one line. So I'm going to change the formatting of this. It's just too small. I can change the style. I want it to be a header. The width isn't quite right. Want it to span the rest of that area. Size, maybe not quite right. Oh, 14 is way too small. I want to change the alignment. So typical things that you see in other rich text editors, like in your Gmail or other email applications, you have access to those as well. I might want to bold this. Looking okay for me right now without having to spend too much time on it because I want to move on. I also like the visual dividers. That might be a personal preference, but I like them and I want to show you how to use them real quick. So I dragged over this divider. You have the option to make it wide or to leave it kind of a little bit short there. You do have the ability to make it a vertical. That will need to be placed between two different components. And then adjusting the color, changing the weight of it, which makes it bigger or smaller. And you do have the ability to change the ID of this. Since our form isn't getting data from here, I often leave these visual ones as they are. Okay, so I've got my header. I'm getting the applicant name and email, other fields I might need, phone number, address, and then I want to gather information from their employment history. So to be able to get their phone number, I am going to use, I can scroll down here to see if they have a phone number, but it doesn't exist. We often use our input field. So this is like a free typing field for gathering this type of information. I'll show you real quick. I can change this to say phone number, change the size of it. I'm going to scroll down here, and as a habit, I want to keep changing this ID to something memorable, so that if I need to access that information or reference it, it's not just saying input one and I have to remember what input one actually is here. I can change that ID to something that makes sense. And we use something called camel casing. You cannot add a space here. I'm clicking to try to add a space, and we cannot with IDs. They need to be just letters, and you can put numbers in here as well. But we use camel casing, which capitalizes the second word if you have two words in here to better differentiate when all of your words are together. And then I'm going to save as I go. I don't want to lose our progress here. Phone number. So we have a couple options in our properties panel, and I want to walk through these in detail for this first one. So we already went over width and label. We also have this required option. If I toggle this off, someone will be able to submit the form without entering in anything into that input field. If it is toggled on, that field will be required. They won't be able to submit. It'll show red, tell them there's an error, and it'll be red text as well, telling them that they need to enter something into that field for them to be able to submit. Other input settings here, I can change the type. So there are 3 different types that we offer: text, email, which will check for that @ and a dot to be able to validate if it's not a valid email that people are entering in. It'll show an error message at the bottom when they're trying to submit. And number, which won't allow any alphabet characters, only numbers in there. Then we have the ability to add a mask. A mask is basically changing the formatting for as it's being typed in. So here we have a lot of masks available. And then if you understand regex at all, you can put in a custom mask for things like budget codes that are specific to your organization, or that's the one that comes to mind because it's used most often. So right now I want it to be a phone number. As soon as we select a mask type, we have the option to put on a guide. And if we hover over this icon, we can see a little description here that it kind of prompts the user what's expected or how many characters are expected. I typically like to add a guide in here just to make things clear for our users. And in addition to that, I also like to put in a placeholder text so people understand the format that's expected. So in this case, it would be the 3 characters in between the parentheses. Then we have 3 more characters, a dash, and then 4 more characters. So that will display inside the field as soon as they click into it, and I'll show you in just a minute how that interacts. It should disappear as they're typing. Other options here, I will give an example of display logic. Validate logic isn't used as frequently since we do have the option to toggle on and off that required. But if you do have a field that is only necessary, that you want to make sure is filled out at one part of the form, or you want to make sure is filled out when another field is added, you can create some logic to kind of make those conditions come into place. And display logic is the same. If you want to hide a field because it's not necessary until certain conditions are met, you can then use display logic to display it at those opportune times. And I'll show you how that works in just a minute. I'm going to save that. And then I want to show you something that I really like to do as I'm building out forms. I click over here on this 3-dot menu. I select debug, and this will show me what the form is looking like for the user, plus some additional data, which is also great. As I add in information here, you can see that it is giving us the data in this state. So it's giving us that data that's input here. If I click submit, you'll see I get an error message. It's highlighting this in red, saying I need to fill it out. And as promised, I will show you how that works with the placeholder and guide. So the placeholder showed it initially, the guide showed you what was expected as you're going on. And if we have multiple steps here, which we will, we'll be able to change the step here so that we can see what it looks like for whoever's initiating. We see what it looks like for an approver. If those views are different at all, we'll want to check to see that they are looking the way that we expect them to. Okay. I'm gonna move right along to show you some display logic because I want to make sure that I cover everything and also answer any questions that you might have. And again, feel free to jot down a question into the chat while I am going through this demonstration, and either Nick will be able to answer it, he'll pause me, and I can answer it as I'm going along. So I want to make sure that this is understood and makes sense to you all. Okay. So let's say that's all the information that I needed from the applicant as far as like their personal information. Now I want to get into some employment history. I want to know if they were employed with Droplet Community Schools before. So I am using a radio button. There are a few different selector field types. So radio, which gives you options, checkbox gives you options, dropdown gives you options. I like the radio for those that need a one or the other answer. Checkboxes are great if you need to have the user select multiple things. And a dropdown is great when you have a lot of options and you want to make it a little bit condensed. Dropdowns also allow for multiple selections too. I'm going to use a radio for this. I'm going to change the label to the question that I have. So have you worked for Droplet Community Schools before? I'm going to change this layout a tiny bit, maybe 8 there. I want it to be horizontal, so I want the options to to display next to each other instead of stacked on each other. I don't need 3 options, so I'll delete that third one. Changing this to yes, and I'm changing this to no. I can adjust the width as well if I want them a little bit more spaced out. And then I'm going to change that ID to worked before. That'll make sense to me. I'm saving. Now I have a question that I want them to answer, but only if they select yes. And that input field didn't go exactly where I wanted it to. So I'm going to try to drag it using my navigation menu here. Actually, that works good. If I just do it inside the builder, inside the canvas. So if they've worked for Droplet schools before, I want to ask when. And I actually don't want an input field. I have a great option of a date time. So when, I only want them to be able to select a date. The time isn't important, and I'm sure they wouldn't remember an exact time as well. There's more logic available here. I can put, I can change what dates are available for them if I wanted to. And I'm going to adjust this ID to say when worked before. Feel like Cookie Monster with my ID descriptions here. Okay. And the important thing that I really wanted to demonstrate with this is I only want this to display when worked before answer is yes. So I'm going to put in some display logic, and I want to check to see that worked before, that ID is equal to yes. When you put an expression in here, it's going to evaluate to true or false. If it evaluates to true, it will display that component. If it evaluates to false, it will not display that component. And I am using 3 equal sign because that in coding language is a strict comparison. So it needs to say yes with the capital Y, ES, and it needs to match exactly. So I'm saving that, and then let's go to our debug view. I'm going to refresh the page. It's going to show me these new things. Now we can see that when is gone. If I select no, it's still not going to be there. If I select yes, it shows up. And from here, I can select a date. It was March 5th of 2018. Awesome. Any questions so far as we're going along? Is it making sense? Silence makes me assume that you understand everything completely, so I'm so glad. Okay, I threw in a couple more things into the chat just as we're going over these details. I have a whole article that explains the components, but you're also able to, if you're not quite sure when to use a component, you can come over here. As you're hovering over it, it'll give you a brief description of the component. Then you can click this learn more, and it'll bring you to our help article for that input multiple line. So if you have any questions about these, feel free to hover over those or click that learn more. Okay, as this is an application, I think the process, I'm going to move on into the workflow because I want to demonstrate this whole, how everything works together. Once it's submitted by the applicant, so this start step here, I want it to go to somebody who's going to review the application. And they'll be able to either say like, all right, doesn't fit our expectations for this role, let's reject it, or yeah, let's send them for an interview. I think that's how I want my process to go. So it's not going to go from start to completed. So I'm selecting this transition line is what I call it, or transition path. I select it and then I'm just going to hit delete or backspace on my keyboard so that it's no longer there. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, give us some more space, drag. And I think our two like ending options here will be, completed, it's hired, they're hired, we want to move forward, or rejected, they didn't meet our expectations or qualifications here. First step to getting there is to review the application. So I come over, I can select the step that I want to add a transition for. And then I hover over the pathway that I want. So this blue check pathway is when submit is clicked. So that's the submit pathway. We do also, and it won't show up because I don't have another step available right now, but we do also have a reject pathway. So we'll have a button that says reject. So if that button is clicked, we need to tell the workflow where it should go if that button is selected. So right now we did that submit pathway. It shows us a plus button saying it's ready for us to click and drag if we need multiple steps from there. It may be that you want to split out the responsibilities for, A through Z should go to this person, or and not A through Z, that would be all of them. A through L or something goes to one person, and M through Z goes through to another person. But I don't really want that. It doesn't fit with my organization right now. I just need the one step forward. I'm going to relabel this as review step and maybe HR review step. And from this like overview here, I can also add my assignment. So every workflow step will need an assignment. So who is completing it? And it needs tasks. So what are they going to be doing with this form? If it doesn't fit either of those, it might just be a notification. Like if somebody needs to know that an application was submitted, but they don't need to do anything with the form, that would be a notification. But right now, whoever's reviewing the step will need to be able to review it and then either click submit or reject, maybe add some notes as well. And that's something that I'll have to add to the layout. But I'm going to assign this to our HR person, Erin HR. They had no choice but to go into HR with that last name. And then after they review it, we're either going to set them up with an interview or reject it. So if we hit the submit button here, I'm going to add another step. The interview step. And then if they hit reject, I want it to go to the rejected step here, and that will end its progress. It'll be labeled as rejected in my submissions view, so I'm able to see that there's nothing that we need to do with that submission. The interview should be done by, let's say, our superintendent. And once they interview, again, we need to define what's happening if they click submit. Let's say it goes to completed. And this is a very simple application process. I don't expect all application processes to be this simple, but just for the sake of demonstration purposes, if they hit reject, I am going to click drag over to align it with this rejected step. Okay, so I have a very basic workflow kind of figured out here. I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to the form because I identified a couple things I want to be able to do. So one would be to add notes. Nope, not formatted text. I want a multi-line. I want Aaron HR to be able to add some notes from reviewing. So questions maybe to ask, and then maybe they review and they call and they set up a date for the interview. So they can put in a date and time. As well. I want this to also show the time. The time's important here. We can do interval, change the interval selector. So if I want to be able to select to the minute, I can change that to 1 minute, or I can change the interval time. I think 15 minutes suits my needs just fine. Again, I'm going to change that ID here. Interview date. Saving. I didn't change the ID here, so I'm going to remember to do that. HR review notes. Okay, so just going back over to our debug view, I can see that I've added both of those things, but they are visible to the applicant, which isn't something that I would want the applicant to see. I don't want them to see that they're reviewing their notes. I also don't want them to be expected to write anything in here. Choose their own interview date and time. That might be nice for them. And then if I go navigate to other steps, I can see they can see all this information, but they cannot come in here and edit anything. So I want to go to an area called the visibility. This will be where I change what the form looks like and how people, how the workflow assignees are interacting with the form. And right now my applicant review notes are highlighted. That's what's selected for me. If I move over here to the steps, I can see the steps that I have just added in the start step. If I hover over here, I can see what these icons mean. 3 different options. We have editable, read only, which shows you that grayed out, you're able to view it, and then hidden, which will just hide it from your view. So I do want it hidden on the start step, and I want it editable on the HR review step. And I do want the interview step to see it, so I'm going to leave that as visible here. Okay, then I want to do the same thing with this interview date and time. So I want that hidden on the start step, editable on the HR review step. And I save that, we should be able to see those changes right away in our debug. Perfect, those are gone. And if I navigate to the HR review step, we can see those are accessible here, which is exactly what I wanted. And then on the interview step, I might want to add in another text area for interview notes. And that's exactly what I'd call it. And I want to change that visibility as well, because it's by default, anything that you add inside the builder will show as editable on the start step. So we'll want to make sure that those are changed. I don't want the HR review step to see it either, but I do want it editable That is the hardest word for me today. On that interview step. Okay. So I have a very, very basic application, gathering limited information from that submitter right now and moving it forward in the application process. I have the right fields available at the right step. I have the steps assigned. That's looking great. Now I may want to add in some notifications. That will be done inside of our workflow. In an application process, I know I, as the applicant, would want to know that either my application was rejected. I want to know that. It's hard to hear, but I want to know it. I also want to know when it's moving forward or when I have an interview. And that may happen that through like a call, or you may want to include it as a reminder here. I think that's what I want to do. So we need to go into the step where that notification should be triggered. Then we have ignoring this right now, because I want to come back to that in just a minute. We have two different options for a trigger. So when it's entering the step, so when the submission enters into the interview step, I want to add a notification, or when it's leaving the step. And now thinking back on it, maybe I want to do it when it's leaving. Nope. I want to do it when it's entering this step. And my thought here is leaving or entering into the step is the same if you submit or reject. So I don't want to send a notification that says, here's your interview date and time if that form was rejected, which would happen if we did exit that step. So once it comes into this step, it's already passed through one way to be rejected. So it was approved, it was moved on in the workflow. So I'm going to come in here, notification, add one when entering the step. Here we will compose our message. If it should only be sent under certain circumstances that are determined by something in the form, you can put in some logic here. Doesn't always happen, so I'm going to skip over that. But if you have questions on that later on, feel free to pop into like open office hours or send an email to support. I'd be happy to help you through that. We select our recipients if we want to send it to multiple people or just one. You have your list, including the submitter, a dynamic, which could involve anything related to input or data on the form. And then anybody inside who has logged into the Droplet application is available. And if I needed to select somebody else, I can do that here, the name and email. But I want it to go to the submitter, which is technically dynamic because we don't know the submitter until they enter in their information. I select the submitter here. I'm going to put in a subject line of reminder, interview with Droplet community schools thing. I can do hi, and then we do offer dynamic fields, or if you don't, there are a limited number of dynamic fields. You can add any information from inside the form using string interpolation, which I'll show you in just a second, but I can add this submitter first name here. Hi, submitter first name. Thank you for applying with Droplet Community Schools. This is a reminder of your interview scheduled for, and in this case, I want that interview date and time here. I can grab that from inside the layout, or this is the component ID. So I'm just going to copy that right from here. And this is where I enter in string interpolation. So that's 2 hashtags. I put in the ID followed by 2 hashtags, and that now becomes dynamic. So whatever is entered in here will display inside the email. Thank you. Droplet community schools. I say that's good for now. I'm going to save. So that's adding a notification. You'll see, remember when we first got in, navigated over to this notifications, this send to assignee was displaying every time a submission moves to the next step to somebody that's assigned to it. So in this case, to Marley, they will get an email, and it's a default email unless you make any changes here. So the defaulted email is very vague, just new submission awaiting your review, very basic information. The subject line, I might want to be a little bit more descriptive and say, interview scheduled with submitter full name here. And I can save that so it's a customized notification to the assignee. So that's adding a notification. I probably also want to notify somebody who is rejected, and I will come in here. I click this rejected step, enter into the details, navigate over to notifications. When it enters into the rejected, so it's moved in here, I want to say, send it to the submitter. Thank you for applying with Droplet community, or maybe, yeah, I'm gonna leave that now. I'm not very good at sending rejections in general, so I may want to edit this later. Hello, adding in that dynamic field so that we don't have to just be super generic. That makes it a little bit more personal. Thank you for applying with Droplet community schools. We have decided to move forward with a different applicant. I don't know if that's easy to hear or not. I may want to change this. Please take a look at our job board. And this is where I might want to add in a link to, if I click this arrow, I can add in a link to our job board page. I don't have one, so I'm going to leave that as it is for future position openings, something like that. Thanks. Nope, not Shanna. Droplet Community Schools. Okay. Appreciate you all bearing with me as I write a fake rejection. Okay. So I have notifications in place. I have a workflow going for me. If I'm happy with the workflow and everything, I may want to just publish, try out a test submission, make sure it's working the way I expect it to, you know, contact Aaron HR and Marley and say, hey, I'm putting in a practice application. Can you look through, go through this process? Let me know if we should make any updates or changes. And that could be good. I do want to show you a couple other features that we have. And I'm checking my slides to make sure I didn't miss anything. I'm going to put in a few more notes for you. Thank you, Nick, for putting in those open office hours. That's the link. We have them 3 times a week. A few more notes here for you. And this was, again, it's a very straightforward workflow. I understand there may be conditions, if we have a specific school that they're applying to, we may have different review or approval processes. I did do a workshop on dynamic assignees. There's lots of resources out there, and also our open office hours, so we can help you through your specific examples that may not be as straightforward as this. We added notifications. We're doing great. And I'm going to show you one more thing, which is our translations feature. This is, again, it's available for our plus plans or as an add-on for other packages, I believe. But I navigate over here to this translations if I want to accept or offer this application in different languages. I can simply come over here to the three-dot menu, select translations, come over here to languages. We have 150 plus languages. We're using Google Translations. So pretty accurate. I use Google Translations when I am looking for it. And let's say Spanish. It's going to load and move it into Spanish. It's going to give you, for any of these text, it's going to show you some of this background stuff. What you'll need to pay attention to is what's in between those tags. So if you need to make any changes there, you can look through. I think it looks pretty good without knowing any Spanish. I'm going to save this. Come back to my form because I want them to be able to select what language they want. I'm gonna change this 8 to just, nope, I want it back. And I'm gonna put the down here language selector at the top. And it's going to default to include every single language that we saw in that list. I want to deselect all and just do Spanish. So that's the only language I've added translations for. Now when I come in here, I can choose Spanish and it has changed the language. I may also want to add English in here to be able to get it back, or I just refresh my page and it's automatically in English. That's how the translations works. If I were to make a silly little change here, and now I need to update my translations, I just come back to this translations tab. It's going to give me an error. I'm going to hit translate again, and it added, I know that became, that's little, right? Okay. Mark these all as correct. It updated my changes. And that's how translations works. Now that I have everything that I want, I'm going to keep that little change there. I'm going to publish this form. It's going to tell me what I told you before. We have versions, so it's locked. Once I publish this, I won't be able to make edits to this version. I will create a new draft and make changes there. And it's published. Now it's going to show me this banner identifying that the form is published. I can create a new draft if I want to make any changes. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on this ride of building out a form. Whoops, I didn't want to stop sharing. I'm going to stop